The bikers laughed at John Cena, calling him nothing but a washed-up wrestler with fake choreographed fights on stage. But the moment they threw the first punch, they realized this was not the WWE arena, and they had just picked a fight with the wrong man. The roadside diner had seen its fair share of rough customers, but tonight was different. The Steel Wolves, a pack of leather-clad predators with road dust coating their jackets and beer foam still clinging to their lips, occupied the two back booths like they owned the place. Laughter rolled through the air, sharp and mean, the kind that made folks look away and pretend they heard nothing. Linda, the middle-aged waitress, kept her head down as she refilled coffee cups, silently praying the night would pass without incident. But trouble was already sitting right there, licking its lips and waiting. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out, tapping his dirty boot against the leg of a bar stool where a younger waitress stood frozen. "Give us a smile. It ain't polite to serve a man without looking him in the eyes." The young woman shifted uncomfortably, her hands gripping the coffee pot like it was her only lifeline. Marcus, the leader of the pack, leaned back with a predatory grin. "Maybe she ain't got much to smile about," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Or maybe she thinks she's too good for us." "Ha!" Laughter erupted from the group, thick with beer and bad intentions. The girl tried to step back, but Marcus was quicker. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to let her know she was not walking away without his permission. That was when the door swung open. A gust of hot wind from the highway swept through, rattling the sugar jars on the counter. Every head turned toward the entrance. John Cena stepped inside. He moved the way a storm does before it breaks, calm, deliberate, inevitable. The years had carved a few lines into his face, but they had not softened him. His massive frame filled the doorway, broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his black T-shirt. Arms thick as tree trunks hung at his sides, the product of decades of relentless training. His sneakers barely made a sound on the old tile floor as he walked to the farthest booth and took a seat. A whisper rippled through the room. "John Cena!" The smirk on Marcus's face flickered. "Well, damn," one of the bikers muttered, shifting nervously. But Marcus was not the type to back down, not in front of his crew. He shoved his chair backward and rose to his feet. "Well, well," he announced loudly, "look what we got here. A damn wrestling superstar in our humble little diner." John did not move. He simply reached for the menu and flipped it open like he had all the time in the world. Marcus strolled over, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "You're John Cena, ain't you?" John let the silence stretch. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Last time I checked." The young waitress yanked her hand free and hurried toward the kitchen, relief washing over her face. "Mind if I sit down?" Marcus asked, though it was not really a question. John turned a page. "I mind." The air thickened into something suffocating. Marcus's jaw clenched as his crew watched. He had just been dismissed. "Now hold on," Marcus said, pulling out the chair and dropping into it anyway. "Ain't every day we get a celebrity passing through. Maybe we ought to get acquainted." John set the menu down, his eyes calm and completely unimpressed. "I prefer to eat alone." Marcus's grin returned, but something ugly lurked behind it. "You think you're too good for company, or just too good for the likes of us?" John did not answer. He reached for his coffee and took a slow sip. And that was what set everything in motion. The complete absence of fear. Marcus had built his reputation on fear, on the way people flinched when he raised his voice. But this man would not even look up from his coffee. The biker snickered. "Man, get a look at this." One jeered, "John Cena don't want to play with us. Maybe he left all his wrestling moves back in the ring." Another smirked, probably forgot they were all fake anyway. "You know," Marcus said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I always heard all them matches you do, they're scripted. Ain't no real fighting in wrestling, is there?" John exhaled slowly. He was too tired for this. One long day on set, one long drive, and all he wanted was a quiet meal. You ever been in a real fight, Cena? Marcus pressed. Or is all that muscle just for show? John leaned back, finally meeting Marcus's stare. A heavy silence settled over the diner. Son, John said, his voice quiet but sharp. You got two choices right now. John nodded toward the front door. You walk out of here on your own 2 feet. He tapped 2 fingers against the tabletop. Or you get carried out. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus gritted his teeth. He could not back down now. Is that right? He snarled. Then he reached forward and tipped over John's coffee. The hot liquid spilled across the table, dripping onto John's jeans. Oops. Marcus feigned innocence. Guess you ain't quick enough to stop that. Ha! John sighed. He picked up a napkin and calmly dabbed at his jeans. No rush, no sudden movements. But something had shifted. What's the matter? Old-timer. Marcus pressed, leaning close, whiskey and cigarettes thick on his breath. Cat got your tongue. Or maybe I oughta teach you some damn manners. John lifted his gaze. Those cold blue eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that dropped the temperature in the room. There was no anger in his expression, no fear. Just quiet, steady certainty. You ought to clean that up, John said, his voice low and even. Marcus blinked, then let out a sharp laugh and turned to his gang. You hear that? He wants me to clean it up. His boys laughed, but the sound rang hollow now. Something about John sitting there, untouched by all the posturing, had sucked the fun out of the room. Marcus turned back, his grin thinning into something uglier. You got some real nerve, old man. Maybe I oughta knock that tough guy act right out of you. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the silent diner. John did not flinch. You don't want to do that. Linda stepped forward, her voice trembling. Marcus, please, just let it go. But Marcus was not listening. What's it gonna be, Grandpa? You scared yet? Scared. John echoed, barely above a whisper. Not even a little. For the first time, Marcus hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed his features, but pride pushed him forward. Then let's see what you got. A Marcus loomed over the table, fists clenched tight. His boys leaned forward, hungry for a show. The diner sat frozen between fear and curiosity. Marcus did not waste another second. With a roar, he launched a haymaker aimed at John's jaw, a punch designed to end the fight before it started. But the fist never connected. In the space of a heartbeat, John moved. One clean shift to the side, and Marcus's knuckles cut through empty air. The momentum sent him stumbling forward, off balance and exposed. Before Marcus could register what happened, John's hand shot out. Iron fingers clamped around his wrist, and in one fluid motion, his arm was wrenched forward and twisted at an unforgiving angle. The diner gasped as one. Pain exploded through Marcus's shoulder. His knees buckled, and he dropped hard onto the tile floor. The crack of bone meeting linoleum echoed through the room. John barely looked fazed. His voice remained calm, almost conversational. First rule, he said, looking down at Marcus writhing on the floor. Never telegraph your punches. Marcus's face contorted between pain and humiliation. He jerked against the hold, trying to free himself, but John's grip was locked tight, unyielding, absolute. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as the rest of the gang sprang to their feet. The stunned silence shattered like glass. Let him go, old man. One of them barked, his voice carrying the bravado that came from having numbers on his side. A switchblade flashed open with a sharp click. The dim glow from the flickering neon lights caught on the edge, a sliver of silver against the haze of the diner. Linda ducked behind the counter, fumbling for the phone, her hands shaking. John did not even blink. With a deliberate, effortless motion, he released Marcus's wrist only to send the same hand driving straight into the biker's face with a brutal elbow strike. A sickening crack rang out. Marcus reeled backward, hands flying up to his nose as blood poured through his fingers. His body hit the floor in a heavy, graceless sprawl. John turned to face the rest of the gang. His posture remained easy and relaxed, but every muscle was coiled and ready. The diner was a second away from erupting. The first biker lunged with the knife, his attack wild and reckless. John sidestepped effortlessly, his grip like a steel trap as he seized the man's wrist and twisted. The knife clattered to the floor with a sharp clang. Without hesitation, John drove his knee hard into the biker's gut, knocking the air from his lungs and sending him crumbling to the floor. "Second rule," John said, his voice steady as iron. "Don't bring a knife to a fight you don't know how to finish." The others hesitated. Moments ago, they had seen John as an easy mark, just another aging tough guy playing pretend. But now he had put two of them down in mere seconds. Fear crept into their eyes, but pride and the rush of adrenaline kept them from backing off. Two of them rushed him at once, hoping sheer numbers would tip the scales. But John was a blur, slipping beneath their clumsy swings with practiced ease. With a swift, precise movement, he lashed out, his boot catching one of them square in the chest. The force sent the man flying backward, crashing into a table with a deafening thud. Plates and glasses exploded upon impact, shards scattering across the floor like fallen stars. The second one tried to grab John from behind, arms reaching to lock him in a chokehold. A fatal mistake. John moved faster, driving his elbow deep into the man's ribs. The breath left his body in a sharp, painful gasp. Before he could recover, John struck the back of his knee, dropping him like a puppet with its strings cut. By now, the diner had descended into chaos. Tables lay overturned in every direction. Shattered coffee cups littered the floor. Chairs sprawled like fallen soldiers across a battlefield. The patrons had pulled back against the walls, watching in wide-eyed silence as John methodically dismantled the gang that had terrorized this place for far too long. Marcus, still hunched over with blood dripping from his nose, struggled to his feet. His face twisted with fury and disbelief. This was not how it was supposed to go. He wiped the back of his hand across his mouth, smearing crimson across his cheek, and snarled through gritted teeth. "Get him." His voice was thick, muffled by the blood pooling in his mouth. "Take him down, all of you." The last two bikers hesitated, their confidence shattered beyond repair. One of them, a wiry guy with tattoos slithering up his neck like venomous snakes, flicked his gaze between Marcus and John. He licked his lips, uncertain of what to do next. "Man, this ain't worth it," he muttered under his breath, shifting a step backward toward the door. His partner, a heavyset brute with a shaved head that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, did not look any more eager to continue. His fists hung loosely at his sides, all the fight drained out of him. John's voice cut through the tension like a blade slicing through silk. "You want to end up like the others." His tone was steady, almost casual, but there was no mistaking the edge of steel beneath the words. "Be my guest." The two men exchanged a quick glance. A silent conversation passed between them in the span of a heartbeat. And just like that, whatever bravado they had left crumbled into dust. Without another word, they turned and bolted for the door, their boots hammering against the tile as they disappeared into the night, leaving their wounded pride bride bleeding on the floor behind them. Now it was just Marcus. He stumbled backward, his chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. His swagger was gone, evaporated like morning dew under a scorching sun. He jabbed a trembling finger at John, his voice hoarse with a volatile mix of rage and desperation. "You're gonna regret this, old man." The words came out weak, more empty threat than true promise. "You don't know who you're messing with." John took a single step forward. Marcus flinched, his body tensing like a man bracing for a blow that never came. John's voice was calm, but there was no room for argument in it. "Walk away," he said, each word landing with the weight of a hammer striking an anvil, "before you embarrass yourself any more than you already have." For a long, suspended moment, Marcus did not move. His jaw worked silently, pride and survival instinct wrestling for control behind his bloodshot eyes. Some reckless part of him wanted to try again, to launch one last desperate attack and salvage what remained of his reputation. But whatever foolish thought had entered his mind, it left just as quickly. The fight had been beaten out of him, along with any illusion that he was the most dangerous man in this room. With a grunt of defeat, he turned on his heel and staggered toward the door. His boots scraped against the debris-covered floor as he clutched his busted face, leaving a trail of blood droplets in his wake. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the silent diner. For several heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. The air hung heavy with the aftermath of violence, thick with the smell of spilled coffee and fear. Then Linda emerged cautiously from behind the counter, her eyes wide with shock, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" John adjusted his jacket, brushing off a bit of dust from his sleeve. He reached for his baseball cap that had fallen during the scuffle and placed it back on his head with practiced ease. "I'm fine," he said simply, his voice as even as if nothing had happened. He turned and scanned the room. Every set of eyes in the diner was locked onto him, a mixture of shock and awe written across their faces like headlines in a morning paper. "Sorry for the mess," he offered, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone, though his expression remained unreadable. A trucker near the window let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. "Did you see that?" he muttered to no one in particular, moved like he was half his age. "Told you wrestling ain't all fake," someone else replied, a hint of nervous laughter threading through their voice. John reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He placed a few bills on the counter, more than enough to cover a meal he never got to eat and then some. "For the damages," he said to Linda, who stood frozen with the cordless phone still clutched in her trembling hand. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. Before she could find her voice, John was already walking toward the door, his footsteps unhurried, his posture relaxed, as though he had just finished a quiet dinner instead of dismantling an entire biker gang. The night air hit him as he stepped outside, warm and dry, carrying the faint scent of diesel and desert sage. The parking lot was empty now, save for a few scattered vehicles and the lingering echo of motorcycle engines fading into the distance. John paused for a moment, tilting his head back to look at the sky. Stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds thrown carelessly across black velvet. A crescent moon hung low on the horizon, casting pale silver light across the cracked asphalt. Behind him, the diner door creaked open. Linda stepped out, a to-go cup of coffee in her hand. She walked toward him with hesitant steps, her apron still stained from the evening's chaos. "Hey," she called out softly. John turned, one eyebrow slightly raised. She held out the cup, a small smile breaking through the tension that still lined her face. "Figured you might need this. Didn't get to finish yours inside, what with all the excitement." He accepted the cup with a nod, lifting it slightly in a gesture of thanks. "Appreciate it." Linda hesitated. There were 100 questions swimming behind her eyes, but only one made it past her lips. "I don't mean to pry, but who are you really? You ain't just some retired athlete passing through, are you?" John regarded her for a long moment, his gaze steady and unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to stretch back through years of experiences she could only imagine. Just a man who's been around long enough to recognize trouble when he sees it. The words hung in the air between them, simple yet heavy with meaning. Linda wanted to push further, to peel back the layers of mystery surrounding this stranger who had walked into her diner and turned everything upside down. But something in his eyes told her that John Cena only ever revealed exactly as much as he intended to, and not a word more. "Well, whoever you are," she said, her voice warm with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. Those guys have been making life miserable around here for years. Never seen anyone stand up to them like that. Most folks just keep their heads down and pray they don't get noticed." John took a slow sip of the coffee, letting the warmth spread through him. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, barely visible in the dim light. People like that need a reminder every now and then, he said quietly, that they ain't nearly as tough as they think they are. He turned to leave, his silhouette already beginning to merge with the shadows stretching across the parking lot. Be careful out there, mister, Linda called after him, her voice carrying a note of warmth. John lifted a hand in a brief wave without turning around. You too, ma'am. Linda watched him walk toward the edge of the highway, his figure growing smaller with each step. When he finally disappeared into the darkness, she let out a long breath she did not realize she had been holding. She turned and walked back into the diner. There was a mess to clean up, broken dishes to sweep, tables to set right again. The other customers were already stirring, murmuring amongst themselves, replaying the events of the evening in hushed, excited tones. Linda grabbed a broom from behind the counter and began sweeping up the shattered glass. The work was familiar, grounding, a return to normalcy after the chaos. One of the regulars, an older gentleman named Frank, who came in every Tuesday for the meatloaf special, shuffled over to help right an overturned table. Hell of a night, Frank said, shaking his head slowly. You can say that again, Linda replied, allowing herself a small, tired smile. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly into the desert night, empty and quiet once more. On the far edge of town, in a dimly lit garage littered with rusted tools and old oil stains, the steel wolves were licking their wounds. The fluorescent light above them flickered and buzzed, casting jagged shadows on the concrete walls. Motorcycle parts lay scattered across workbenches, and the air hung thick with the smell of motor oil and stale cigarettes. Marcus paced back and forth like a caged animal, his boots scuffing against the grease, stained floor. The rage in his eyes burned hotter than the pain throbbing through his battered face. His nose had stopped bleeding, but the swelling had already set in, turning his features into something grotesque. His crew slumped around the room on overturned crates and old car seats, some nursing bruises, others just staring at the floor in silence. The humiliation hung between them, thick and suffocating, impossible to ignore. No one spoke. Not until Marcus grabbed a wrench from the nearest workbench and slammed it down with all his strength. The loud clang of metal against metal made several of them flinch. You got any idea how this makes us look? His voice was rough, strained, a volatile mixture of fury and wounded pride. His cold gaze swept over his men, daring someone to answer. No one did. Marcus's lip curled in disgust. That washed, up wrestler made fools out of us. He snarled, the words dripping with venom. People are gonna talk. They're gonna say the steel wolves got their asses handed to them by some old man in a diner. His nostrils flared as he inhaled sharply, trying to steady his breathing. But the anger was too fresh, too raw. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw John Cena's calm, unshaken face looking down at him while he writhed on that dirty floor. The memory made his blood boil. A few of the bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Tyler, the youngest of the crew, shifted uncomfortably on his crate before finally working up the nerve to speak. Marcus, maybe we should just let it go, he said, his voice hesitant but firm. That guy, he ain't normal. We all saw what he did. He took us apart like we were nothing. Marcus's head snapped toward him, eyes cold and sharp as broken glass. What did you just say? Tyler swallowed hard but held his ground. I'm just saying, what if we go after him and the same thing happens? What if it's worse next time? The guy moved like nothing I've ever seen. Maybe he's got training we don't know about. Military, maybe. Or something else. Marcus took a slow step toward the younger man, his presence suddenly filling the space between them. You want to run? You want to hide? Is that what you're telling me? Tyler lowered his gaze, his face burning with shame. He was not the only one who had doubts, but none of the others had the courage to voice them out loud. Crossing Marcus was almost as dangerous as taking on John Cena himself. We're the steel wolves. Marcus hissed, his voice like barbed wire scraping against stone. Nobody, and I mean nobody, gets away with making us look like damn fools. Not some celebrity. Not some retired athlete. Not anyone. The wrench hit the workbench again, hard enough to send a nearby toolbox clattering to the floor. Wrenches and screwdrivers scattered across the concrete like fleeing insects. We're gonna find him, Marcus declared, his voice sharp as the edge of a hunting knife. And this time, we ain't holding back. No more games. No more talking. We bring the whole damn storm down on his head. The gang did not cheer. There were no hoots, no hollers, no fists pumping in the air, just grim nods and tight jaws. They knew better than to argue with Marcus when he got like this, even if some of them were not entirely convinced this was a fight worth picking. Get the gear together, Marcus barked, already moving toward the back of the garage where they kept the heavier equipment. Bats, chains, whatever you got. We hit him tonight, before he has a chance to leave town. The men began to move, reluctantly at first, then with more purpose as the adrenaline started to kick back in. Chains rattled. Metal scraped against metal. The garage filled with the sounds of preparation, the grim symphony of men readying themselves for violence. Meanwhile, several miles down the highway, John had settled into a roadside motel. It was one of those no-name places with a flickering neon sign out front and a parking lot that had not seen a fresh coat of paint in at least a decade. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and nobody remembered faces. The room was simple. A bed with a faded floral comforter. A wooden desk pushed against the wall. An old television mounted in the corner, its screen dark and dusty. A single lamp cast a warm yellow glow across the worn carpet. It was quiet. That was all John needed. He sat at the desk, a cup of coffee from a nearby gas station cradled in one hand. Steam curled lazily from the surface, rising and dissipating in the still air. In his other hand, he held a worn leather notebook, its cover soft from years of handling. He flipped through the pages slowly. Some were yellowed with age, filled with sketches and notes written in a younger man's handwriting. Others were newer, the ink still dark and sharp. But they all carried weight. Lessons learned. Battles fought. People met and sometimes lost along the way. It was not nostalgia that kept him turning the pages. It was something deeper. A reminder of who he was, of why he never took men like Marcus lightly, and why they should have done the same. His fingers paused over an old photograph tucked between the pages. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded. It showed him in his prime, barely into his 30s, standing in a wrestling ring with a championship belt raised over his head. The crowd behind him was a blur of faces, thousands of people on their feet, cheering. His younger self looked sharp, hungry, full of fire. The weight of experience had not yet carved lines into his face. But his eyes, the determination in them, was the same then as it was now. John studied the photograph for a long moment, then carefully placed it back between the pages and closed the notebook. He took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through his chest. Through the thin curtain, he could see the glow of the motel sign blinking on and off, red and white letters stuttering against the darkness. He knew men like Marcus, had known them his whole life. Loud, arrogant, the kind who mistook volume for authority and cruelty for strength. They were not dangerous because of skill. They were dangerous because of pride, and men like Marcus did not take humiliation lightly. They stewed in it, let it fester, and then they came back, usually with more numbers and less sense. John had no illusions about what was coming. The fight at the diner was not the end of anything. It was just the beginning. But that was fine. He had been through worse. He set the coffee cup down on the desk and stretched his arms above his head, rolling the tension out of his shoulders. His muscles ached from the earlier confrontation, but it was a familiar ache, almost comforting in its way. A reminder that he was still capable, still sharp, still ready. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer out at the parking lot. Empty, save for his rental car and a battered pickup truck parked a few spaces down. The highway beyond was dark and silent. Nothing but open road stretching into the desert night. He let the curtain fall back into place and turned toward the bed. There was nothing more to do tonight. Whatever came next would come in its own time. John kicked off his shoes and lay down on the mattress, stacking his hands behind his head. The ceiling above him was water, stained and cracked, a map of neglect and age. He stared at it for a while, letting his thoughts drift. Sleep came slowly, as it always did. His mind ran through the events of the evening one more time, cataloging details, analyzing movements, filing away information that might prove useful later. It was an old habit, one he had never been able to shake. Eventually, the exhaustion won out. His breathing slowed, his muscles relaxed, and John Cena drifted off into a dreamless sleep, his body resting, but some part of him still alert, still listening. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the scrub brush, carrying with it the faint scent of rain from somewhere far away. Back at the garage, the steel wolves finished their preparations. Engines roared to life one by one, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like thunder rolling through a canyon. Marcus climbed onto his motorcycle, his jaw set tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Let's ride," he said, his voice low and hard. The pack pulled out of the garage and onto the empty highway, their headlights cutting through the darkness, like the eyes of predators on the hunt. The rumble of engines grew louder, swelling from a distant murmur into a thunderous roar that shattered the stillness of the desert night. John's eyes snapped open before the first motorcycle even pulled into the parking lot. He lay motionless for a heartbeat, every sense sharpening as he listened to the sounds outside. Gravel crunched beneath heavy tires. Engines cut off one by one. Boots hit the ground. Voices, low and rough, exchanged words he could not quite make out. John swung his legs off the bed and rose in one fluid motion. He moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. 7 motorcycles sat in a loose semicircle near the entrance of the parking lot, their riders dismounted with deliberate slowness, the chrome of their bikes glinting under the sickly yellow glow of the motel sign. Marcus stood at the front, a baseball bat resting on his shoulder. His face was a mess of bruises and swelling, but the fury in his eyes burned brighter than ever. Behind him, the rest of the steel wolves spread out, armed with chains, pipes, and at least one more blade that caught the light. John let the curtain fall back into place. He took a slow breath, rolling his neck until the joints popped. Then he reached for his shoes and slipped them on, taking his time, no rush, no panic. He had known this was coming. The only question had been when. Outside, Marcus's voice cut through the night air like a jagged piece of glass. "Cena!" he bellowed, loud enough for the whole motel to hear. "Get your ass out here. We got unfinished business." A light flickered on in one of the other rooms. A curtain twitched. Somewhere, a door lock clicked as a nervous guest secured themselves inside. John walked to the door of his room and paused with his hand on the knob. He could hear them out there, shuffling, muttering, psyching themselves up for round 2. They had numbers. They had weapons. They thought that would be enough. He opened the door and stepped outside. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the faint scent of dust and exhaust. He stood in the doorway for a moment, silhouetted against the dim light of his room, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Marcus's grin stretched wide across his battered face. "Well, well," he called out, spreading his arms in mock welcome. "Look who decided to show up. Thought maybe you'd try to sneak out the back like a coward." John stepped forward, letting the door swing shut behind him. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he stood about 10 feet from the nearest biker. His hands hung loose at his sides. His eyes moved across the group, taking in their positions, their weapons, their body language. "You boys must really enjoy getting hurt," he said. his voice calm and even. "Because I can't think of any other reason you'd come back for more." Marcus's grin faltered for just a second before he forced it back into place. Big talk from a man who's outnumbered 7-1. He spat back, "Let's see how tough you are when it ain't just a fair fight." John tilted his head slightly. "Fair." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Son, there ain't nothing fair about what's about to happen to you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as a guitar string about to snap. Then Marcus swung the bat. John sidestepped the blow with an almost casual grace, the wooden club whooshing past his ear close enough for him to feel the displaced air. Before Marcus could recover his balance, John's hand shot out and grabbed the barrel of the bat. One sharp twist, and it was wrenched from the biker's grip. In the same fluid motion, John drove the handle into Marcus's stomach. The gang leader doubled over with a strangled grunt, all the air forced from his lungs. John tossed the bat aside, sending it clattering across the asphalt. "First lesson hasn't changed," John said, looking down at Marcus gasping at his feet. "Don't telegraph your swings." The others charged. The first one came in fast, a length of chain whipping toward John's head. John ducked low, letting the chain sail over him, then surged upward with an uppercut that connected squarely with the man's jaw. The impact lifted the biker off his feet, and he crumpled to the ground in a heap, the chain slipping from his limp fingers. Two more rushed him from opposite sides, trying to catch him in a pincer movement. John spun to face the one on his left, catching the man's pipe, wielding arm at the wrist and twisting sharply. The pipe dropped with a clatter as the biker howled in pain. John silenced him with a knee to the midsection, then used his bent over body as a pivot point, swinging around to plant a devastating kick into the chest of the second attacker. The man flew backward, slamming into one of the parked motorcycles. The bike toppled with a crash, taking another one down with it in a domino effect of chrome and steel. John straightened, barely breathing hard. 4 down, 3 still standing. One of them, a burly man with arms like slabs of meat, hesitated. His grip on his weapon, a heavy wrench, loosened slightly. Doubt flickered in his eyes. "You sure you want to do this?" John asked, his voice almost gentle. The man glanced at his fallen comrades, then back at John. For a moment, it looked like he might actually turn and run. But Marcus, still struggling to catch his breath, screamed from the ground, "Don't just stand there." His voice was ragged, desperate. "Get him, you useless pieces of garbage." The burly man steeled himself and charged with a roar, the wrench raised high. John waited until the last possible second, then stepped inside the arc of the swing. His forearm blocked the descending blow, absorbing the impact with a grunt. Then his other hand drove forward in a palm strike that caught the biker square in the nose. Blood sprayed. The man staggered back, dropping the wrench to clutch his shattered face. The remaining 2 came at John together, coordinating their attack with surprising discipline. One swung low while the other aimed high, trying to overwhelm him with simultaneous strikes. John dropped into a crouch, letting the high swing pass over his head while catching the low attacker's leg mid-kick. He yanked hard, sweeping the man off his feet and sending him crashing onto his back. Before the other one could adjust, John was already rising, his elbow driving upward into the man's chin with enough force to snap his head back. Both men hit the ground within seconds of each other. John stood alone in the middle of the parking lot, surrounded by groaning bodies and fallen weapons. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, but otherwise he looked almost untouched. Marcus had managed to push himself up onto his hands and knees, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead where he had scraped it against the asphalt. He looked up at John with eyes that burned with equal parts hatred and disbelief. "What the hell are you?" he croaked. John walked toward him slowly, his footsteps crunching against the gravel. He stopped directly in front of the beaten gang leader and looked down at him with an expression that held no anger, no triumph, just a wary kind of patience. "I'm the guy who tried to warn you," John said quietly. "Twice now. But you just wouldn't listen." Marcus's hand scrabbled across the ground, searching for a weapon, anything he could use. His fingers closed around a loose piece of pipe. John saw the movement and sighed. Before Marcus could even lift the pipe, John's foot came down on his wrist, pinning it to the ground. Not hard enough to break anything, but firm enough to make it clear that the fight was over. "Let it go," John said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable weight. "You lost. Your boys lost. It's done." Marcus glared up at him, teeth bared, veins bulging in his neck. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then, slowly, Marcus's fingers uncurled from around the pipe. It rolled away across the asphalt with a hollow metallic sound. John lifted his foot and stepped back. "Get your people and get out of here," he said, "and don't come looking for me again. Next time, I won't be so gentle." He turned and walked back toward his motel room without looking back. Behind him, he could hear Marcus cursing under his breath, hear the groans of the other bikers as they slowly picked themselves up off the ground. John reached his door, opened it, and stepped inside. He closed it behind him and stood in the darkness for a moment, listening to the sounds of motorcycles, starting up one by one outside. Engines revved. Gravel scattered. The roar of the pack faded into the distance until the night was silent once more. He walked to the sink in the small bathroom and turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on his face. The man in the mirror looked tired, older than he felt, but his eyes were still sharp, still clear. John dried his face with a thin towel and tossed it on the counter. He returned to the bed and lay down again, stacking his hands behind his head. The ceiling stared back at him, cracked and water-stained, indifferent to everything that had just happened. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and quiet under the pale glow of the stars. John closed his eyes. His body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that reminded him he was still alive, still capable. Sleep came easier this time. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and gold. John woke with the sun, as he always did, his internal clock more reliable than any alarm. He lay still for a moment, taking stock of his body. His knuckles were sore. His forearm throbbed where he had blocked the wrench. A dull ache ran through his shoulders and back. Nothing he could not handle. He rose from the bed and stretched, working the stiffness out of his muscles with practiced movements. Through the thin curtain, he could see the parking lot bathed in early morning light. The asphalt bore the scars of last night's confrontation. Scuff marks. A few dark stains that might have been blood. One of the motorcycles still lay on its side, abandoned by its owner in the hasty retreat. John showered quickly, the lukewarm water washing away the remnants of sleep and exertion. He dressed in fresh clothes from his bag, a simple gray t-shirt and worn jeans, then gathered his belongings. There was not much. He had learned long ago to travel light. Before leaving, he took one last look around the room. The bed was made, the towels folded neatly on the bathroom counter. Old habits died hard. He stepped outside into the cool morning air. The desert had a different character at this hour, softer somehow, the harsh edges smoothed by the gentle light. A roadrunner darted across the parking lot and disappeared into the scrub brush. Somewhere in the distance, a truck rumbled along the highway. John tossed his bag into the back seat of his rental car and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the first try, a reliable hum that promised many more miles ahead. He pulled out of the parking lot and onto the highway, leaving the motel and its memories behind. The road stretched before him, a ribbon of gray cutting through the golden-brown landscape. He drove with the windows down, letting the wind rush through the car, carrying away the lingering tension of the past 24 hours. About 15 miles down the road, He spotted a familiar sign, the diner where everything had started. On impulse, he eased off the gas and turned into the parking lot. The place looked different in the daylight. Less lonely, more welcoming. A few cars and trucks sat in the lot, early risers stopping for breakfast before continuing their journeys. Through the windows, John could see figures moving about inside, the normal rhythm of a small town morning. He parked and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. A few heads turned, then quickly looked away, pretending not to stare. But John could feel their eyes on him, could hear the whispered conversations that followed in his wake. News traveled fast in places like this. Linda stood behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, frozen mid-pour. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. "Well, I'll be," she said, setting the pot down. "Didn't expect to see you again." John slid onto a stool at the counter. "Thought I'd get that meal I missed last night?" A smile broke across Linda's weathered face. "Coming right up. Coffee, please." She poured him a cup, the dark liquid steaming as it filled the ceramic mug. John wrapped his hands around it, appreciating the warmth. "Heard there was some commotion over at the Desert Rose Motel last night," Linda said, her voice carefully casual as she wiped down the counter. Bunch of motorcycles tearing out of there in the middle of the night. Looked like they'd seen a ghost. John took a sip of his coffee. "That's so." Linda laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You don't give much away, do you?" "Never saw the point in it." She shook her head, still smiling, and headed toward the kitchen to put in his order. John sat quietly, watching the morning unfold around him. A young couple in a corner booth shared a plate of pancakes. A truck driver, at the far end of the counter, worked his way through a mountain of eggs and bacon. A family with two small children occupied a table near the window, the kids giggling over their coloring menace. Normal life. The kind of thing John had spent his career entertaining, inspiring, giving people something to believe in. It felt good to see it up close, unfiltered by cameras and crowds. Linda returned with a plate loaded with scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and toast. She set it down in front of him with a flourish. "Best breakfast in 3 counties," she declared, "or your money back." John smiled. "I'll hold you to that." He ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food was simple but good, cooked with care and served with genuine warmth. It reminded him of diners he had visited throughout his years on the road, small oases of comfort scattered across the American landscape. As he ate, the door chimed again. John glanced up to see a young man enter, maybe 19 or 20, with a nervous energy about him. He recognized the face. Tyler, the youngest member of the Steel Wolves, the one who had urged Marcus to let things go. Tyler spotted John and froze in the doorway. For a moment, he looked like he might turn and bolt. But then something shifted in his expression, a decision being made, and he walked over to the counter. He stopped a few feet away, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Mr. Cena." John set down his fork. "Just John is fine." Tyler swallowed hard. "I wanted to say something. About last night, about everything." John waited, giving the young man space to find his words. "I'm sorry," Tyler said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "I know that don't mean much coming from me. I was there both times. I didn't try to stop it, but I want you to know, I'm done with all that. With Marcus, with the Wolves. I'm out." John studied him for a long moment. He could see the sincerity in the kid's eyes, the shame, the desperate hope for some kind of absolution. "Takes guts to walk away from something like that," John said quietly. "Most people never do." Tyler nodded, his jaw tight. "My mom, she's been sick. I've been telling myself I stuck around because Marcus paid good, because I needed the money. But that's just an excuse. Truth is, I was scared. Scared of what they'd do if I tried to leave. And now I'm more scared of what I'll become if I stay." The John reached for his coffee and took a slow sip. "You got a plan. There's a community college 2 towns over. I was thinking maybe I could enroll, get my life together. Start fresh? That's a good plan. Tyler managed a weak smile. You think so? I know so. John reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted several bills and held them out. For your first semester books. Consider it an investment. Tyler's eyes went wide. I can't take that? You can, John said firmly. And you will. Call it a gift from someone who believes in second chances. The young man hesitated, then reached out and took the money with trembling hands. His eyes glistened, though he blinked rapidly to keep the tears at bay. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick. I won't let you down. Don't let yourself down. That's what matters. Tyler nodded once, then turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. John watched him go, a small measure of satisfaction settling in his chest. Linda appeared at his elbow, having witnessed the exchange from a respectful distance. That was a kind thing you did. John shrugged. Kid just needed someone to give him a push in the right direction. We all do, sometimes. He finished his breakfast and signaled for the check. Linda waved him off. On the house, she insisted. After everything you did for us, it's the least I can do. John started to protest, but the look in her eyes told him arguing would be pointless. All right. Thank you, Linda. You take care of yourself out there. John Cena? She smiled warmly. And if you're ever passing through again, you know where to find the best breakfast in 3 counties. He stood and extended his hand. She took it, her grip firm and sincere. I'll remember that, he said. John walked out of the diner and into the bright morning sun. The heat was already building, the desert preparing for another scorching day. He climbed into his car and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the diner window, he could see Linda chatting with a customer, laughing at something they said. Life going on, as it always did. He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, the road unspooling before him like a promise. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, ancient and patient, indifferent to the small dramas of human lives. John drove with the window down, the wind tangling through his hair, the sun warm on his arm. He thought about Marcus and the steel wolves, wondered if they had learned anything from the past 2 days. Some men never did. They kept making the same mistakes, picking the same fights until the world finally broke them down for good. But Tyler had a chance. And sometimes, one person making the right choice was enough. The highway curved ahead, disappearing around a bend in the landscape. John followed it, as he had followed countless roads before, not knowing exactly where it would lead but trusting in the journey. Behind him, the small town grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it finally vanished altogether, swallowed by distance and dust. Ahead, the horizon beckoned, vast and open and full of possibility. The miles melted away beneath his wheels as the sun climbed higher in the sky. John drove without hurry, letting the rhythm of the road settle into his bones. The desert gave way gradually to scrubland, then to patches of green as he moved toward more hospitable terrain. By midday, the landscape had transformed entirely, rolling hills dotted with oak trees replacing the stark beauty of sand and stone. He stopped for gas at a small station nestled in a valley between 2 gentle slopes. An elderly man sat on a wooden bench outside, whittling a piece of pine into the shape of a bird. He looked up as John approached, squinting against the sunlight. Nice day for a drive, the old man observed. That it is, John agreed. Heading anywhere particular? John considered the question as he pumped gas into his tank. Wherever the road takes me. The old man chuckled, his weathered hands never pausing in their work. Best kind of journey, if you ask me. Too many folks these days got their whole lives mapped out. Forget there's beauty in not knowing what comes next. John smiled at that. There was wisdom in simplicity, he had learned. The people who lived closest to the land often understood things that escaped those caught up in the noise of modern life. He paid for his gas and bought a bottle of water from the small store attached to the station. As he walked back to his car, the old man called out to him. Safe travels, friend. And remember, the road don't just take you places. It teaches you things too, if you're willing to listen. John raised a hand in acknowledgement and climbed back behind the wheel. The engine hummed to life, and he pulled back onto the highway, the old man's words lingering in his mind. The afternoon passed in a comfortable blur of changing scenery and quiet reflection. John thought about the people he had encountered over the past 2 days. Linda, with her quiet strength and warm hospitality. Tyler, standing at a crossroads, choosing to step toward something better. Even Marcus, consumed by pride and unable to see past his own need for dominance. Each of them represented something, a facet of human nature that John had witnessed countless times throughout his life. The capacity for kindness, the possibility of redemption, the destructive power of ego unchecked. He had spent years in the spotlight, entertaining millions, becoming a symbol of strength and perseverance. But moments like these, small encounters with ordinary people facing their own battles, reminded him why he had always tried to use his platform for good. Not for the fame or the recognition, but for the chance to make a difference, however small, in someone's life. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. John pulled off the highway at a scenic overlook, a small parking area perched on the edge of a cliff with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. He got out of the car and walked to the metal railing at the edge of the lookout point. Below, a river wound through the valley like a silver ribbon. Catching the fading light, mountains rose in the distance, their peaks dusted with the last remnants of winter snow. John stood there for a long time, letting the beauty of the moment wash over him. The world could be harsh and unforgiving. He had seen that firsthand, in the ring and out of it. But it could also be breathtakingly beautiful, full of moments that made all the struggle worthwhile. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text message from his manager asking about his schedule for the following week. Another from an old friend, checking in to see how he was doing. He typed brief replies to both, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. The real world would be waiting for him when he returned. Obligations, responsibilities, the endless cycle of appearances and events that came with being who he was. But for now, in this moment, he was just a man standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the sun set over a valley he would probably never see again. And that was enough. As darkness began to creep across the landscape, John returned to his car. He had one more stop to make before the day was done. The town appeared on the horizon just as the last light faded from the sky. It was larger than the one he had left behind, with more lights, more people, more evidence of civilization pressing against the wilderness. He found a motel on the outskirts, newer and cleaner than the desert rose, and checked in for the night. His room was comfortable, with a proper mattress and a television that actually worked. He showered and changed, then sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through channels without really watching anything. His mind kept drifting back to the events of the past 2 days. The confrontation in the diner, the fight in the parking lot, the look in Tyler's eyes when he accepted the money for his books. John wondered how many other Tylers were out there, trapped in situations they did not know how to escape. How many young men and women were making choices that would define the rest of their lives, without anyone to show them there was another way. He could not save everyone. He knew that. But he could do his part. He could be the example, the voice, the helping hand when it was needed. That was what all those years in the spotlight had really been about. Not the championships or the accolades, but the platform they provided to reach people, to inspire them, to remind them that they were capable of more than they believed. John turned off the television and lay back on the bed. The ceiling was smooth and white, unmarked by water stains or cracks, a small improvement over the previous night. He thought about what lay ahead. More miles to cover, more people to meet, more opportunities to make a difference, one small moment at a time. The road had taught him many things over the years. Patience, resilience, the importance of staying true to who you are, even when the world tries to shape you into something else. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: strength was not measured by how hard you could hit. It was measured by how you treated others, especially those who could not defend themselves. By the choices you made when no one was watching. By the legacy you left behind in the hearts of the people whose lives you touched. Marcus and the Steel Wolves had thought strength meant domination. They had learned otherwise. Some lessons came easy. Others had to be beaten into you. John hoped Marcus would eventually understand. Hoped the defeat would crack open something inside him, force him to look at himself honestly, maybe for the first time. But that was out of John's hands now. All he could do was plant the seed. Whether it grew was up to Marcus. Sleep came gently that night, settling over him like a warm blanket. No dreams disturbed his rest. Just deep, peaceful darkness, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done what he could with the day he had been given. Morning arrived with birdsong and sunlight streaming through the curtains. John woke feeling refreshed, lighter somehow, as though he had left something heavy behind on the road. He packed his bag, checked out of the motel, and walked to his car. The day was bright and clear, the air crisp with the promise of new beginnings. As he pulled onto the highway, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The town shrank behind him, then disappeared around a curve. Ahead, the road stretched onward, winding through hills and valleys, leading to places he had never been and people he had yet to meet. John Cena smiled and pressed the accelerator. The journey continued, and somewhere back in that small, desert town, Tyler sat in the admissions office of a community college, filling out enrollment forms with hands that no longer trembled. Linda wiped down the counter of her diner, humming softly to herself as the morning rush began. The Steel Wolves had scattered, their unity broken, their leader nursing wounds that went deeper than flesh and bone. Life went on, as it always did, changed in small ways, shaped by the brief presence of a stranger who had walked in, made his mark, and walked out again. That was the nature of things. People came into your life, left their imprint, and moved on. The lucky ones recognized those moments for what they were. The unlucky ones only understood their significance when it was too late. But the road did not care about luck or timing. It simply stretched forward, patient and eternal, waiting for the next traveler to come along. And somewhere out there, another diner waited, another town with its own troubles and its own heroes waiting to be discovered. The story never really ended. It just changed hands, passed from one person to the next, carried forward by those willing to stand up when it mattered most. John Cena knew that better than anyone, and he would be ready. Thank you for following this story! Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.